Voting itself is not moral, but I mean, as far as voting for your government politicians, voting for the state, that's just basically actively participating in an immoral system, and that kind of makes you immoral by implication, by default, by extension.
Welcome, everyone, to Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Carter Laren, and I'm joined, as usual, by the lovely Keri Smith. Keri, say hello.
Hello, Carter. How are you?
I'm all well and good. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Daniel Wagner from Unframe of Mind. Daniel is the father of four, a writer, graphic designer, political and social commentator, singer, songwriter, creator of things unique. After graduating with a BA in Business Information Systems, Organizational Management, and Entrepreneurship, Daniel has been working full-time supporting his family and working on a continuous stream of side projects, including Unframe of Mind. In his free time, Daniel loves to sing, play guitar, video games, and woodworking. Daniel pulls much of his influence from philosophers and free thinkers, old and new alike, like Aristotle, Socrates, Ayn Rand, Stefan Molyneux, David Smalley, Joe Rogan, and countless others. You should be warned that I've heard the rumor is that prolonged exposure to Daniel may cause nausea, disorientation, dizziness, loss of appetite, morning wood, and critical thinking. You can follow him on Twitter at Unframe of Mind and on Minds at Unframe of Mind, and you can go to unframeofmind.com. I think I got it all. Daniel, welcome to the show.
I'm glad you had me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Daniel, it's so good to see you again.
Yes, ma'am. I really enjoyed having you on our show, and we've been working forever to try to. And then I realized that in order to get on your show, you're the wrong person to go through, and that's okay.
You got it. For scheduling purposes, I need Carter on copy to keep me honest.
You're like the free spirit of the group, aren't you? You're the one hard to nail on, but once we get you, you're like amazing, right?
Accurate, I guess you could say.
Keri just needs a dad. It's okay. It's fine.
Oh, man. You know what? I'm not even going to get offended because it's true. And yeah, anyway.
Lack of scheduling abilities is a manifestation of daddy issues. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, I don't have daddy issues. I just have, I'm learning to, here's the thing. We're here to interview you. Why are we talking about personal issues? The reason I'm not getting offended is because I recognize that one of my shortcomings has been in life and to sometimes expect others to help parent me. And so there are things that you learn to do as an adult that I didn't learn when I was an SJW that I'm learning now. And also I have a condition called time blindness, and Carter doesn't believe is real.
Why don't you put that in your Twitter profile, Keri? Why don't you just put Keri Smith time blindness in your Twitter profile? That's the thing now.
It's true. Anyway, welcome, Daniel. You are here. I'm glad I could talk to you. I had so much fun on your show. I laughed a lot. And there was the clip you did about, you totally took me by surprise because I wasn't sure what you were saying. I was talking about the SJW wars and knitting, Carter, and I was saying something about the white knitters, and he was like, excuse me, can you back up?
Right. Well, that's a normal response if you haven't been paying attention. Yeah.
Oh, no. I was trying to be a smart aleck and imply that she was using the N-word.
Oh, I see.
She's in a white knitters group. Yeah, okay.
Knitters is a euphemism, I see. Yeah.
So, Daniel, I want to hear a little about your background, because one of the things that we talked about on your show that was interesting is that we're sort of doing similar things. We both are doing a podcast. We both have an anarchist atheist as a host. Well, you are. Is that correct? An anarchist atheist? And Carter was saying for the show that you're one of like 5 people he knows who's also anarchist and atheist. How did you guys come to be together doing the podcast? Like, what's your background? What motivated you? What compelled you to start doing a show?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what. I started out with a couple of other shows before Unframe of Mind, trying to kind of pull on some of the things that I enjoy doing, such as like music. I had one called Stars Underground, where I kind of the idea was to help musicians with their marketing strategies and things like that. That didn't really take off, and I didn't have my heart in it. I tried another one called Parent of Progress because I was into this newfound peaceful parenting thing. And so I was like trying to relay all the great things that have come of it and the things that I've learned and the things that I'm struggling with and that kind of thing. Also didn't really take off. A lot of people aren't like super stoked about a parenting podcast.
You know what? Wait, can we just pause on? I know I'm interrupting already, but props to you for doing that, because the way to solve most of our problems is through parenting, but no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to hear about it. Everyone gets triggered. Like they're like, don't tell me how to parent. We just got to spank our kids more. Like that's just, it's like, all right, you can't have rational discussion. So thanks for trying.
Yeah. Matter of fact, that was actually one of the big discussions in our Unframed Minds group. We have a private Facebook group called Unframed Minds, and one of the topics that came up was spanking, and that was probably, we actually got into more of a debate about that than we have about any other thing in the entire, like all of the topics that come up. I mean, we talk about vaccines and Agenda 21 or whatever, all sorts of just whatever things that people want to talk about from whatever side of the political spectrum you are. And the spanking one was a especially interesting one because everybody was really like dug in hard on their side, and I wasn't really wanting to listen, but they were still respectful because that's the group rules. So everything was fine. But it was really interesting to see how much pushback you get on that right away. And I totally understand it. I was there. I've been on both sides of the parenting spectrum. But to continue, I decided, you know what have I always enjoyed doing? And it's having conversations like this, having conversations of a deeper, more meaningful, philosophical, including the parenting portion is included in that. So I don't just stop talking about it but I've now allowed myself a lot more room. And it was a buddy of mine named Lee Mullendore. You'll go back and look at a bunch of the earlier episodes and you'll see him on there with us. And we just started having the conversations and having the talks and bringing up the subjects, the hard subjects nobody wanted to listen to, nobody wanted to talk about. And we called it our catchphrase, uncomfortable conversations without a condom, came out of our kind of in the gutter style sense of humor. We're real open and filterless for the most part. We have a dirty sense of humor. We'll make any jokes you want to make. It doesn't matter, what you believe or think or feel. We'll make the jokes, and it was just a lot of fun. And well, Lee moved on since then, and I brought in my current co-host Anthony, who happens to be a Christian conservative. And on the face, if you look at it as an anarchist, atheist, and a Christian conservative, you think, wow, these guys must battle about everything. Well, it turns out it kind of proved the thought that I had before, that most people agree on most things. But it's just a few things we disagree on. And very, very seldom do we actually have straight up disagreements on the show. But when we do, it's very amicable. It's very respectful. It's very, I see where you're coming from, but I disagree with it. That kind of the way it used to be back in the 6th grade when we could have a conversation and disagree with our boys and still be friends in the morning,
Yeah. Although I don't think that's necessarily true for the same. I think that the segment of the population for which that is true is actually shrinking a little bit, because there is a segment of the population that isn't starting with the same fundamental premises that even you and your co-host share, that, hey, you should be able to have free speech and we should be able to have dialogue about this. And, there's an increasing segment of just kind of an authoritarian mindset that doesn't like even having the conversation. I think that's difficult to talk to those people.
I agree.
Yeah. As long as but I think I love it because it proves something that I think our show is also trying to prove, which is that as long as you do agree on those basic fundamentals, free speech, dialogue, then anything you can have a conversation about anything without it coming to, you're evil for not agreeing with me. And I so love that. I love that you guys are doing this together. So can you tell me a little bit about so it sounds like you've opened up what you guys talk about. It's a much more broad category than it used to be. So it's not just parenting. Do you guys tend to be more, we describe ourselves as like a culture podcast primarily, and then we get into politics sometimes. Do you hit on politics a lot? Would you say it's more of a culture show?
We talk about relationships, social issues, bold ideas, and LOLs. Those are our categories.
I like it.
Yeah, if it falls under those, that there's a pretty safe bet we're going to talk about those things. So I guess it would be a little, very much in alignment with you guys' show as far as cultural type things, and we talk about relationships and we talk about kind of real personal stuff, because that's, I think, where you're going to see the most impact on people's lives. Those have been some of our biggest shows, actually, is talking about people with drug addictions and alcohol abuse and childhood trauma and things like, stuff, real issues that people are dealing with. Not this, oh, did you see what Nancy Pelosi said and the way she smirked on camera? Whatever. I don't care about that stuff. Nobody really, honestly, I don't think anybody actually gives a shit. It just gives them something a common point to talk about and bitch about. But beyond that, the real stuff, the stuff that, when you find yourself having to no choice but to confront those in your very own household, I feel like the politics is kind of a way of avoiding those conversations. It's a way of skating over it. It's a way of trying not to actually address the issues and pretend as though and feel as though you're actually addressing something. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Focusing on the external instead of the internal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's so many people in my immediate circle that, you find out real quick who your friends are and who really honestly values your friendship or your company, if you will. You just tell them the truth. Speak truth to people. You'll find out really, really quickly what your actual circle looks like. And I think a lot of people are really scared of what that might actually entail. So they just continue to play nice and continue to just talk about the weather and talk about politics and talk about, coronavirus. It's just that kind of thing that just keeps everybody from actually discovering the true nature of their relationships.
I think that's brilliant, because I think you're spot on about that. It keeps them from actually connecting and having the hard conversations. I mean, one thing that I like about you guys is you also have some wild people on your show, and you just you had a show with an avowed racist, and you were just like, all right, let's have a conversation. And I think you've had some people on the far left. I understand. You've had like SJW types on your show as well.
Whenever we can get them, yes.
Yeah, you don't seem to shy away from any conversations, which is great.
No, not at all. Not at all. We actually, I think we value the conversations where somebody disagrees with us more than we do about just, shooting the shit with an echo chamber. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to cuss on your show?
Yeah, you can swear.
Yeah.
Okay. I try
Every time you swear, Carter has to put his own money into the swear jar.
Oh, okay.
Wait,
okay.
That's a new rule.
I try to avoid the hard ones, but
I had no idea. That was a rule.
You're basically broke now after this show.
Yeah. Well, I thought I only had to put it in for when I swore, but apparently I have to put it in for when everyone swears. So can you just? I happen to be an anarchist atheist. Everyone knows what an atheist is, and that's not complicated. But I think a lot of people. I don't talk about it much on the show. What does it mean to you to say that you're an anarchist? Because I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, "So you're like Antifa?"
Yeah, I know, and that's the interesting thing is I hear people in the media, people I respect that should know better, use this word anarchy in this very derogatory kind of way. Well, these people are out there protesting, and you have straight anarchy in the streets. You hear Mark Levin, you hear Dan Bongino, you hear a lot of these. Even Tim Pool says the word anarchy in such a way that you're like, oh, these guys don't actually know what it is. This word has been so co-opted by mainstream media and by the elites and by, obviously you're not going to learn what anarchy is if you're in a government-ran public school, because it's antithetical to what they completely stand for. So it's no surprise that people don't know what it is. To me, it just means no rulers, no people at the top telling everybody how they can live their life, no bi-legal system wherein the underlings have this one set of rules and the people in the ruling class have the second set of rules. It's like actual equality. It's like real equality for everybody. Equality of not of outcome, but of just equality. Just I don't know. I'm losing my words here, but like I said, it's very interesting to hear them say it, and then viscerally as you and I hear these things, I think it's like, oh God, there's another example of somebody who doesn't know what it is. People hear it and then it's just dug in even deeper, the wrong definition of what it is. It's like so frustrating. And it's like we need a new word for it, right?
Well, I've started saying voluntarism because people don't know what it is, and then I have to explain it, and then I'm like, oh, it's where people voluntarily have interactions with each other, and there's no rules about there's no rulers over them. They voluntarily interact with each other, and people kind of nod their heads and even if they don't agree, that sounds peaceful. But when you say anarchy, they think of like destruction and nihilism, right?
I will admit I'm one of the people who thinks of destruction and nihilism when I hear the word anarchy, just because of how it's been used my whole life. And so meeting you, Carter, and finding out that you were an anarchist started to change some of those ideas of what that word meant for me. But it still holds overall that it's I think you might be on the right path by just coming up with a new word, because I don't know if you can take that word back entirely. I don't know. I try to with certain words. Like I try to hold on to the word liberal, although it's come to mean something other than liberalism. So I don't know. That's interesting though. So what about this may be a dumb question, but when I was in college, I had a copy of the Anarchist Handbook that someone gave me. Is the Anarchist Handbook
You mean the Anarchist Cookbook? Is that what you mean?
Yes, the Anarchist Cookbook. And it was all
Hey,
about how to make
get your
bombs.
anarchy literature correct, Keri. How dare you?
Is that representative of anything that you believe or no?
Honestly, I've never even read it. I don't even know what it is. I have no idea.
Do you know what it is, Carter?
Yeah, I know what it is. No. I mean, the Anarchist Cookbook is basically a guide to mischief. It's like, here's how to disrupt society. It's not I would even call it more of like it's more of like an insurgent cookbook, wouldn't you say, Keri? I mean, you read it.
Yeah, it was. And so I think that also shaped my perception of what anarchist meant.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I do like the word voluntarism much better. The thing I like about anarchy as a term, and the same thing I like atheism as a term. The reason I like them both is because both terms actually tell you what I don't believe. Right. They don't tell you anything about what I do believe. You actually have to talk to me and get to know me to understand what I do actually believe. What are my principles? Anarchism and atheism don't say anything at all whatsoever about who I am, what I believe. They just tell you what I don't believe in. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting way of looking at it.
That is a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the same way that gets you in trouble too, because people have assumptions. Because if you say you're an atheist, for example, that means a whole thing to a whole bunch of people when technically it just means what you don't believe. What do you find? Do people ask you about those things, and what do you say?
Well, a matter of fact, that's kind of how I determine who I'm actually going to continue to interact with, because you can tell when people have this like visceral reaction to what you are and they don't have any curiosity whatsoever. All they have is assumptions. I can already tell that's probably going to be a pretty manipulative person in my life. I don't need them around. I'll be cordial with them unless they do something otherwise to make it so that that's not the case anymore. But I'm not going to bring them into my inner circle. I'm looking for people that are curious. Hey, what's that mean? What do you mean by that? What do you actually believe? Like, how do you feel about this? People that are like digging in and want to know more, and they're respectful about it and they're open to it. That's the kind of people that it's almost like a way of a filter of sorts. If that makes sense. This is a way I can kind of determine who gets to come in and who don't.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, what do you say to when people say, well, how could you have a state without a government? What's your vision? Because I think there are a lot of different people who call themselves anarchists that have different ideas for what that would look like.
So can you maybe give me something a little more specific?
Well, I mean, I can ask the general question, I can ask the standard. What about
who's going to build the roads?
Is it okay to murder people? Like, what happens? What's wrong with your society? How could you not have a law against murder and cops enforcing that?
Yeah, the standard kind of answer for that is I just go straight to, if you believe that taxation is theft, and if you believe theft is wrong, then therefore the government is immoral. So, and quite frankly, I don't care how we solve the problems. Just like I don't care how we pick the cotton, slavery is wrong. I don't care how we build the roads. It's immoral to steal money from people to justify building them. It's just on a moral basis. If you agree with the taxation is in fact theft, and I haven't heard any convincing arguments otherwise, then you have to follow that logically, that government is therefore immoral. And need to get rid of it, and we need to find another way to do it. Yes, it's going to be hard at first. Of course it's going to be hard. People aren't used to thinking that way. And it's kind of interesting when I get in these conversations with people and we start talking about some of the specifics of some of the things that, how we could handle X and Y, and how might something, be handled differently in an anarchist free society versus the government controlled totalitarian society that we're looking at. It's like they start to go, oh, I never even thought of that. But that is interesting. Like you point out how the incentives are all wrong. How you point out, well, there's, in a government ran X or Y, they don't have any incentive to actually solve the problem because they leave themselves without a job. So their incentive is to keep the problem alive. Matter of fact, you see the war on drugs, you see the war on poverty. Those things have only continued to escalate since the beginning of those programs. They're super successful.
It worked really well, right? The war on drugs. We're done. So I think, how come we don't have mission accomplished on that one?
I mean, as long as like the best one I've seen is if they can't even keep drugs out of prisons,
right?
Like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Right. It's pretty clear. But they're going to try and make you live in a prison, and they're going to justify it by keeping drugs out of your hands.
I don't know. If you have a solution to the problem, go over to this prison and see if you can solve it there. If you can solve it there, then maybe we'll talk.
Then we'll talk. Yeah, fair enough.
Expand that to the broader society.
Yeah. I mean, something that always, I'm glad you kind of brought this up, because something that bothers me about the arguments about anarchism is when people say, well, how would you do X, Y, and Z? It starts with, it comes from an assumption that I think is wrong to begin with, which is that we should have the answers to how everything should be done. Like, the answer is, I don't know. Like, if someone had said to me 30 years ago, how would you build a supply chain so that iPhones would get into people's hands? I'll be like, I don't know. Right. How would that happen? I have no freaking idea. But guess what? We'll figure it out. Like, people will interact and it'll get figured out. So the idea that, like, how could you possibly build the roads? It's like, well, if you want to get from A to B, you'll figure it out. Like, it's not an unsolvable problem. Why do we have to have a bureaucrat solve it?
And one thing I thought about is, everybody's bitching about, hey, where's these flying cars we were promised by 2020? Guess what? If we didn't have the presumption of needing roads all the time, maybe we would have come up with another solution, because building the roads becomes so costly that it's cheaper actually to produce a vehicle that goes above the ground. Maybe by now we would have that technology.
I'm so glad you brought this up as well, because it's an environmentalist issue as well, because there's this whole, because the environmentalist movement their solution is never deregulation, right? It's always more government, right? But if you hadn't had the government build all of these roads, we might have a vastly different transportation system. We might have much more mass transit and much less, pavement everywhere. We probably it wouldn't be as economical, as you're saying, to just build cars and have everyone have cars and drive them all around, because you'd have to be paying for using the roads, and someone would have to be maintaining, like, directly paying, not just, taxing. And the idea, and maybe even cities wouldn't be designed the same. Our whole lifestyle would be different if it wasn't for government taxing us and throwing roads together. So I just, even from an environmental impact, I sometimes think of, like, I don't know what it would look like, but it might be better. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think. How would you think that we would even get there? That's always the big trouble. Is like, well, we've already got this thing, with status quo and whatnot. I've always wondered that, is like, how people would even imagine that transition taking place. I think that's really, honestly, and I have empathy for this, that it actually scares people. The idea that, well, because I've actually heard this. I hear what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. And I agree with the ethics behind it, but we have what we have today. This is just the way it is. I can't even imagine, and a lot of this is a lack of imagination. I can't even imagine what it would look like, that transition. How do we get there?
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer for that. I've always just kind of back on that it's a multi-generational issue that's going to have to be we're going to have to continue to educate people, teach people, raise our kids peacefully, that kind of thing, so that hopefully eventually, 100 years from now, we might actually see some semblance of what kind of society we're talking about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think that's an illegitimate concern when someone says, like, well, if we just cut the government out tomorrow, it would not be the anarchist utopia that you and I imagine. Like, that would not overnight happen. And I think this kind of gets back to Keri's earlier question about whether you guys talk about politics. One of the reasons that we don't talk about politics much is precisely because we believe that the culture and actually the philosophy behind culture need to change, and that ultimately politics is really just a manifestation of what people already kind of believe. I mean, we ignore the Constitution, right? It doesn't matter what's written down. It's ignored. It's ignored because culturally and philosophically, no one gives a crap about it. So if in order to get to the society that we're talking about, you need to have a bunch of people who actually don't view human relationships as power dynamics, but view them as exchanges, win-win exchanges between equals, and we don't have that culture.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. That's a solid point. It's scary just thinking about it, just even for me. And I've thoroughly sunk myself into this stuff, and I've already come up with ideas for how we would do things. And I'm always looking at things through this lens. And you're not, like you said, you can't just drop the government tomorrow and expect everybody's lenses to change at the same time. People are still going to continue to wear the race lenses. They're going to continue to wear the statist lenses. They're going to continue to wear the I've been publicly educated lenses, and everything else. Like you have to change from the bottom up, the children up. For a lack of a better phrase, you kind of have to indoctrinate the children into this new idea. Right.
I like to use the word inoculate, but okay.
Inoculate against the bad ideas, you mean?
I'll go with that one. That's probably a much better word.
But well, I actually meet you have kids, right? I mean, I
do.
I don't think my daughter will. I mean, I guess in 10 years someone can call me out on this, but I don't think she's ever going to be susceptible to social justice type ideology, not because I indoctrinated her, but because from day one, I'm a peaceful parent. We've used reason and evidence and like encouraged her to think on her own. Like I'm not that worried about some Marxist coming along and saying, hey, let's start judging people by the color of their skin and put them into categories and, whip people for the behavior of their ancestors. It's like, I just don't see that as an idea that could really take root.
Yeah. When I'm raising my kids, there is a lot of negotiation going on. That's probably one of the biggest things is the negotiation aspect. We were just talking about this last night on one of our private Zoom calls we have for the Facebook group. And the idea was when I was growing up, my dad would tell me no if I asked him something. And then if I was to ask him why or anything like that, all I got in return was, well, because I said so. His word was final, no matter what, no questions asked, no reason, no rationale, no negotiation, no nothing. What he said goes. And a lot of us have been raised that way. And so I end up raising my kids that way at first before I discovered the peaceful parenting aspect of it. But it's interesting seeing how the kids really thrive with that. There's been a number of times when they'll come to ask me something and just like, I'll say no. And then they'll want to know why, and I'll have to come up with something. So I'm careful to even say no before making sure I have a damn good reason for saying no. And then sometimes I have a good reason. Sometimes I say no and I have the good reason, but that's not even the end of the story. The end of the story is, or it's usually, oh, well, what if I this, or what if I do that, or what if I, maybe we can work it out better this way. And the kids start thinking that in that mode where they actually have some kind of power and pull in the relationship, and they actually are a lot more. They're a lot easier to get along with in general, I think, because when I want them to do something, I can then turn around and do the same thing. I'm not pulling hair trying to get them to do things. They've got their own personality flaws. For example, my son, I call him bare minimum guy because he doesn't do anything wrong, but he will do it what I ask of him and nothing more. So he gets what he wants, and that's just how he's happy. He's Mr. Procrastinator, Mr. Bare Minimum guy. And then I've got my daughter who she's constantly out learning new stuff. I've actually got her on the job site working with me now. That was one of the benefits of quitting my previous job. I work for myself. She gets to work with me. We're doing home remodels and construction and things like that. she gets to come out and do it with me because she's been learning. She wants to learn. She's the above and beyond. She's always got good grades kind of personality. But these are the different things I get to see and get to nurture as a result of not smashing them down with constant no and beating and violence and groundings and trying to, it just doesn't work for us,
Right.
Used to, I guess, but not really.
This is so fascinating. Can I just say, this is so fascinating to watch the two of you together. And I'm sure any of our regular viewers will think this is funny too, because it's like two Carters. I'm not saying you're exactly the same, but you guys are so similar in some ways. Like, just when I heard you start talking about the parenting style of just because I said so, Carter's talked about that before. And I don't have kids, so I learned a lot of these parenting tips from him that I'm filing away just in case. But one of the ones he's told me is that and he said on the show before, which is exactly what you said, is you have to have a reason why, because you're teaching a child to reason and to think. And it can't just be you're teaching the child to respect authority and that's it,
Right. The end
so
result,
it was.
because the end result is we have a government where if they pass a law, everybody goes, oh, well, it's just law. Well, the government mandate said we have to wear masks, no question asked. So everybody wears masks, and then you got the same. I'm not saying it's quite the same thing, but you
Right.
kind of the thought process behind it, and then you end up with hundreds upon thousands of videos of Karens out there telling people, "You got your mask on, you're endangering my life," and you get all this crap coming out of it. It's like this is the mindset. This is the mindset of people that weren't parented in a negotiation style, peaceful parenting style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I love it.
So what can you, what are some of the, I know that people don't like to hear about parenting, but I want to talk about it. So fuck it. What are some of the biggest like challenges you've had? Because a lot of people are like, well, I've tried to negotiate, but sometimes you just have to, put your foot down. And I've never had that experience where negotiation failed. So I don't know what they're talking about really, but like maybe other people have had negotiation failures. What's the hardest part of this?
Here's the thing. When people do that, I feel like what they're saying is, as a parent, I should still get my way. Right?
Right.
That's where that's coming from. I should still get my way no matter what. I just can't come up with the reasons enough to make my kid, obey me. I think that's honestly what it is. I can't tell you how many times I've begrudgingly had to go and take the kids off to somewhere because I really didn't want to. I wasn't really feeling like it, but I didn't have a good reason not to. But you know what? You do for your kids. You got to work back and forth because guess what? Someday you're going to ask them to do something that they really don't want to do. And then you'll be able to call back to that experience and say, listen, you remember when you wanted to go over to your friend Jessica's house or whatever, and I really didn't feel like doing it, and I did it anyway because you asked me to. So can we have that same mutual respect? You can have that back and forth that way. But as long as you got the mindset of, hey, I feel like I'm parent and what I say goes and I'm going to negotiate, but my negotiation ain't working because I can't get the little shits to do what I want them to do. It's like, no, you got to change your whole mindset on it. You're still guide and coach and parent. You're still in a position of authority, but you have to give some. You have to.
Yeah. Well, and because your goal is to raise someone with enough self-esteem and negotiation skills and reason to go out in the world and question when the government passes a law and be like, well, why is that? Like, maybe I don't agree with that, and have an opinion that runs contrary to what authority figures are telling them. And if you expect to have, we just read this book, Ordinary Men, which was about regular, like the Police Battalion 101 from Nazi Germany, getting sent to Poland to kind of quote police, but they ended up they ended up being ordered to kill Jews and do a lot of horrible things. And one thing that really struck me was like, well, how do you raise a society of people who won't do that? And I mean, it starts with people who don't give a crap what the authority thinks when it's contrary to what their own convictions are.
Right. That is one concern I've had as I moved on into anarchist style thinking. I have some friends that are in the military, and of course, one of the concerns is in the event that something should happen where the military comes in and has to martial law or what, I don't know what it would look like. I asked them straight up. I said, how would you handle that situation? Like, do you have to follow orders? Do you have to? And they've all told me that they would not. That it goes against what their core beliefs are, and they even have the ability to go against it. But then they also tell me some other things, like they're not allowed to go on social media and post about their beliefs because they can be, fired from their jobs. And so they're not allowed to have a free voice either. There's a lot of conflict going there in their worlds, I feel like, but it's something that I always wonder, was their parenting of the kind that would have them question the authorities in a moment when they're asked to do something that they otherwise would never do in a million years.
Right. And people are notoriously bad at predicting whether or not they will follow authority off a cliff, right? They generally have good views of themselves. And well, I wouldn't do that. But when it comes to actually being asked to do it, they seem to never live up to their own self-image. So it is a little bit concerning. And especially as we look at the social justice crowd try and take over governments, the thing that I tell a lot of the Blue Lives Matter people and the cop backers, which, I have friends that are cops too. And so they're, the ones that I'm friends with are good people. But who do you think is going to enforce these laws? Like, for the most part, it's going to be the people you're defending, and they're not going to give a crap about you. They're just going to follow orders for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something to think about. And I really hope it doesn't come down to that. That would be not great at all. I don't think we've tipped the scales enough on convincing people that anarchy is the way, because we got a hell of an uphill battle.
We're pretty far from that, I think. I think we're
best I can do is personally I can raise my kids to my principles, and people who have interacted with my children, they love them to death. They see how well behaved they are. I've never had any trouble out of them. It's a way that people can look and see what the manifestation of my core principles turn out to be like. And then maybe somebody else can look at that and go, oh, I like what you did there. How did you get through that? And they'll start asking questions, and they'll start to understand where this world could lead. I hope. I think that's the way we do it. Honestly, it's going to take a long time though.
Yeah, it's a long slog, but maybe it's the only way. I mean, where do you see this going? Do you see that as being the only solution, or do you think are we going to turn a cultural corner soon?
Man, it really depends on what authors I'm reading at the time. I start reading some George Orwell, and it's all downhill from here. You go and read 1984, and you go, oh God, we're like there. This is our world right now. It's terrifying. You read Animal Farm, you read Gulliver's Travels, even. You can kind of see some of the same patterns going. I think this is just a continuous cycle we've been on for this roller coaster of states getting power and more power, and then people finally revolting and going, no, we don't want that. And then they battle it off, and it comes back again. It's like at some point we got to pull our heads out of our asses and recognize that, hey, that little state thing you guys keep trying to do, just like you argue communism doesn't work, neither is that. Communism just fails a lot faster, and it's a lot more in your face,
That's one of my favorite criticisms against like voluntarism or anarchy. Is like, you're just an idealist with some kind of utopian society. And it's like, well, who's the utopian idealist? The guy who thinks we should try something that's never been tried that could work? Or the person who's like, every state ever in all of history has become horrible. Let's try that again. Let's write some different rules down. It's like, I don't know. It seems a little bit more utopian to me.
That's really funny, Carter, because I was going to ask you, since I have two of you here, to ask you guys
Sorry,
earlier.
Keri, I feel like we're monopolizing.
No, that's okay. I was going to ask you guys to explain how your utopia, for exactly the same thing, because we criticize social justice Marxists all the time for having this utopian idea that they're supposedly working towards, and you just went ahead and did it for me, so thank you.
Well, Utopia itself is not a bad thing. Like, a utopia isn't a bad thing. It's the principles upon which the utopia is based. Like, the Marxists have pretty evil underlying principles, and then they have a utopia that's disconnected from reality. Like, those principles don't correlate to reality, so the utopia is crap. But if you have principles that correlates to like actual morals, saying it's a utopia, it's like the word extremism, right? People are like, oh, being an extremist is bad. I don't know. What does it mean to be extremely healthy? Like, extremism as such isn't bad. Like, it depends on what you're extreme about. That's bad. It's not extremism that's the problem. It's the it's the thing that you're extreme about. There's no such thing as extremely healthy, extremely moral, an extremely just society. Like, gee, that's horrible. I don't like. Sorry,
Just all this water in my system. I'm extremely hydrated.
Right.
Stop doing that. No, I haven't heard it put quite that way, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, this extremism isn't necessarily a bad thing. Utopia isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've never been trying to shoot for a utopia necessarily. I know people are going to, screw up. I know people are going to make mistakes, and people have evil intentions. I mean, you can't argue with that. You know that. You see it. It's just do you create a society in which just a few of those evil, nasty assholes has all the power? Or do you have a society where that evil nastiness is a little bit more decentralized and diffused and much easier to handle on a local level, versus this giant behemoth of state that literally nobody knows how to change it, how to redirect the ship? Like, that's a virtually, if not impossible, task to do.
And actually, no one likes it. Like, no one on either side, not that the side, I think they're the two sides of the same coin, but no one on either the left or right actually likes the government. Like, no one's actually satisfied with their representation. No one says, Congress is doing a great job. I've never hear that. Do you? I don't know.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
I didn't. I actually heard.
So I have a question for you, Daniel. You mentioned leaving your job earlier and starting to do your own thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I was curious about you balancing, like, how do you balance a job and then also doing a podcast where you speak your mind in this day and age where people get canceled so easily? Did that play any part in you moving on, or am I just reading into things?
It did not. Actually.
Oh, okay.
It could have, and I'm glad I left because they have now changed their policies to where it would if I was still working there.
Wow.
And the policy change came so quickly that a lot of people that heard of me leaving assumed that I got fired because of it. Because there has been a few people fired because of some social media posts that were reported to the HR department. And the company I'm talking about is Nissan. And that's where I used to work. And I never said it publicly on my show because, I know how social justice warrior mobs work. And yeah. I wouldn't hold it against Nissan to fire me if the mob's coming and threatening to boycott. They got to run a business too. I get it. So I just kind of kept that separate. I don't have any problem saying now I'm self-employed. The guy that I work with loves me to death. I mean, there's nothing that's going to happen that I'm going to lose my job. The mob has no control over that. That's the point. But the funny thing is I spent my time during the COVID-19 shutdown because we were furloughed and we weren't working for about 3 months. Okay. Right before we come back, I went ahead and just made the leap and said, you know what? I don't want to go back in there. They're putting in all these COVID-19 measures where we got to wear masks and we got to have dividers between everybody and everybody's got to stay a certain. And it's already hotter than hell in there as it is. So I decided, I'm gone. I'm leaving. I'm not going back. I'm going to take the leap and do this new thing. And so far, so good. It's working out. And I ended up hearing the rumors through the grapevine that I was fired because of my social media posts. I have a reputation around my work group about the types of things that I talk about. And a lot of them will engage me in those conversations, which is a lot of fun. Makes the day go by much faster, especially when you're just doing the same repetitive monkey task over and over and over again. So I get this message from a guy. He's like, "Hey, was it true? Were you actually fired for such and such?" And I'm like, "No." And he called me up and I talked to him, told him what was going on, and I ended up making a big post on social media saying basically the gist of it is, of all the people I worked with, 2 people reached out to me and actually asked me what really happened. The rest of you assholes continue to spread the rumor around that I got fired. And meanwhile, what I actually did was I did the exact thing that all the rest of you have been griping about the entire time. All of you have been bitching because you hate your job. And you're telling me how much you can't stand it and you wish you could do something else and you wish and having all these hopes and dreams and never doing anything about it. You had an opportunity literally of a lifetime, 3 months off work, paid, and you did nothing. You sat on your asses, you watched Netflix, and you bitched about the COVID on the TV or on the internet, and then you went crawling back to work because you're scared to go out and do your own thing. And it's like, come on, people, let's be about it instead of saying just either. Sorry, you can tell I'm a little heated or a little passionate about this particular subject. And that drives me nuts. People bitching about their jobs and never doing anything about it. Like, for Pete's sake, people, like, do something, anything.
Yeah. Not taking the initiative. I think that's I don't know if that's a function of the culture that we're in now, or if that's just always been a human thing. Speaking of Gulliver's Travels and cycles, but I know a lot of humans who, during the past 3 months or 4 months, have just kind of moved into whatever their bad habits were more fully. And so instead of taking advantage of, like you're saying, making the best of a bad situation and using the time to maybe learn new skills or work on some stuff they've been wanting to do, from home, some of their own personal projects. I had a friend who was saying, and I've seen this happen with friends who were drinking a lot before the pandemic are drinking a lot more now,
Right.
People who maybe had spent too much time on social media, spending a lot more time on social media now. But like whatever those bad habits are, I think it's been brought to the surface, or it's been exacerbated by this in some cases. And
good point.
Thank goodness I quit drinking before the pandemic because I might be one of those people. But yeah, I like your point. I like that you just seize the day. You're doing what you want to do. You're going after it. It's very Jordan Peterson of you.
Well, another thing is the family dynamics that were already total shit and were being avoided by going to work every day. Like when you're only interacting with your family for a few hours a day, you can kind of get by. You can kind of make the most of it somewhat. But when you're stuck in a house with them 24/7, boy, does that really test the actual value of the strength of your relationships. And there's actually, I was looking, I can't remember who it was talking about this, that the amount of deaths that were caused due to the lockdown are so much higher than the actual deaths of the reason we were locked down to begin with.
Yeah.
Because of suicide and because of domestic violence and because of just overdosing and just all sorts of other just basically the road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of things going on here, where we think we're doing good for society by shutting everything down and trying to protect everybody and trying to put everybody in a bubble wrap, when in reality you end up with higher death count than you did. Everything just ends up way worse because you cannot. That's the thing about trying to. Central planning is not how we would solve these things. It's just not. This is what you get. But people they're not aware of the numbers. First of all they hear is about their great Aunt Edna that we're trying to protect and we're trying to wear a mask around. Like, great, I get it. That's fine, and that's a good thing. You're good people with good hearts, and I appreciate that. But you got to pull your head out of your ass. You really do, because you're not getting the full picture. You're just not.
Yeah.
And they certainly aren't. You talked about incentives earlier. The people, quote, in charge. We like to use the term the cathedral. The cathedral has no incentive to tell you the truth about any of this. This is just this is part of the show. They're gonna scare you about COVID. They're gonna only talk about one side. When a doctor comes and says something contradictory, they're gonna rip him down off of YouTube as fast as they can, so you don't see any counter arguments. They're gonna make sure that your worldview is carefully constructed by the narrative they want you to believe. So I don't know. What do you think?
Do you guys think?
Go ahead.
I saw something today about how Trump had tweeted that maybe we should postpone the presidential elections so that we don't have to rely on mail-in voting. And I saw some people in my timeline were kind of joking about how, okay, congratulations, if we do this, we've just cured COVID, meaning they'll drop this narrative, the pandemic will go away in terms of public consciousness, in terms of the legacy media, the cathedral pushing it. If the election were to be postponed, because they're kind of viewing it as just the virus itself as being exploited for propaganda purposes. Do you think that there's any truth to that? If the election were to be delayed, postponed, do you think that the virus would go away?
Can I answer the question a little bit differently? You probably expected I was going to answer this question. Okay. So when it comes to electing someone or voting for somebody, I actually wrote an entire guide called The Politician's Guide to Rigging, Winning an Election. And it just goes over and details all of the ways that politicians will rig the election. And examples, cited sources, experts, everything else is in this particular document. I'll send you a link later if you are interested.
I've got it pulled up here, actually. I was looking at it before the show, yeah.
Okay, so regardless of what exactly the strategy is, or what order we do things in, or how are we going to do mail-in ballots? Are we going to wait? Are we going to ban voter ID laws? It doesn't. Quite frankly, none of it really matters. I could care less whether or not the election is postponed, because it's just going to be rigged anyway. I don't care. I don't. As an anarchist, that's something I think almost zero about.
Right.
Do you think that the elections are actually completely rigged? Because I would have been more on that page with you prior to Trump getting elected, but it seems to be they really don't like that he got elected. Like, it seems to be that the bureaucracy really didn't want this.
Completely rigged is kind of an impossible standard to meet. So no, I don't think it's completely rigged, but I do know there is so much of it that anybody that looks into it will not have any faith in your elections. You just won't.
Sure. That makes sense.
I mean, if you see all the different methods that are used, and I'm pretty sure I didn't list all of them. Those are just the ones that I could figure out and find credible sources for.
Yeah, no, I remember I used to be a cryptographer, and I remember years ago, like we looked at when Diebold came out with their voting machines originally. It was like the security was so pathetic that it was almost unbelievable that they got away with this. And then it wasn't like there was not really any big, like, they quote fixed it, but there was no like, we're going to ditch Diebold as our company, or like it was not. It was like, oh well. But I think at one point they literally, in one machine, someone found they had stored keys in plain text just there. Like, it was just the most moronic stuff. But that maybe got reported a little bit, and then it went away. We never heard about it. No one cares.
So out of curiosity, like if we had an election that was done through the blockchain, cryptocurrency, that kind of world, I don't know how much you know about it, but if you do know about it, would you be comfortable with an election being held on the blockchain?
Me?
Sure. I mean,
I think democracy sucks. So I don't know what's the point of holding an election on the blockchain, to like violate my rights more directly. I don't know.
Yeah. I realized as that question left my lips, talking to because I'm not used.
I would be comfortable with it.
Anarchist, rather.
I would be more comfortable with it taking place on the blockchain.
I would be more comfortable with it. Yes.
Yeah.
I would believe the results more. Let me put it that way. I will believe the accuracy of the results.
Maybe that's a better way.
Would that make me comfortable?
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah,
regardless, you guys are too funny.
Regardless, it's still two wolves and a sheep voting on what they're going to have for dinner.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so actually, speaking of elections, this is actually something that I think you and I disagree about as anarchists, and that's always fun because there's sometimes, I like disagreement. I don't think it's immoral to vote. I did for a long time. I didn't vote for 15, maybe 20 years. I didn't vote for a long time. I thought it was immoral. But you think it's immoral to vote. Make your case, and then I'll tell you why you're dead wrong.
Oh, I was kind of hoping you'd lead with why I'm dead wrong, but okay. I mean, as far as
I want everyone to hear, though, that.
Okay, I guess basically is along those same lines. If I'm not saying voting is immoral, I'm saying voting in a system of government is immoral. Voting itself is not moral, but I mean, as far as voting for your government politicians, voting for the state, that's just basically actively participating in an immoral system. And that kind of makes you immoral by implication, by default, I'm totally lost the word I'm actually looking for, but by extension, by association,
proxy. Yeah.
By proxy. Sure, why not? that makes you kind of implicit in the crime that's being
Right.
committed. You're like, yeah, if I'm going to steal, if I'm going to come to Keri's house and I'm going to steal her money, and I'm going to break in, I'm going to steal that horse back there on her mantle there. That's immoral. Nobody would look at that and go, yeah, you're kind of you're kind of really nice. You did the right thing. But if I then turn around and vote for somebody else to go in and take the horse, that doesn't suddenly make the crime any less bad. It just makes me kind of pulled away from it a little bit, but I'm still committing the damn crime.
That's
Right.
interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So I like
that.
this argument.
I don't agree, but I like it. Okay.
Yeah, I like the argument. I think it's a good argument. Here's my disagreement with the argument.
Let me throw one more thing.
Oh, okay, please.
Now, these politicians are telling Keri that we're going to take that horse and we're going to give it to an orphanage of kids that really, really needs it. Does that make it better?
I don't want them coming to take my horse.
Right.
But
if
I feel like I can't stop them from coming to take the horse anyway, I might vote for the people who I think are going to give my stuff to the places I would prefer it to go.
Yes, that just puts you in a picking the lesser of two evil situation.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you rather have a society where you voluntarily go to the orphanage of your choice and give your horse away because you felt like doing it out of the kindness of your own heart instead of being told that you're a monster for not doing it and we're going to take it anyway?
This is a good argument. You're going to have me thinking about this for a few days.
Well,
Carter, why have you never made this horse
Keri,
argument?
are you actually moral if someone takes your horse and gives it to the orphanage? They've robbed you of the ability to be moral yourself because you didn't have a choice in that. So actually, you lose the ability to do a moral act through the theft.
Okay. I'm with you. But I thought you were going to explain why he's wrong.
Yeah, he's going to.
I will.
Okay.
I will. So here's why I think you're wrong. Although I like everything you said. It's all good. The initiation of the use of force is wrong. Using force in defense is not wrong. So the analogy I'll give you is, we're in a room run by a bunch of mobsters who are stealing from other people and shooting people they don't like. And the mobsters turn to us and they say, and you and I both agree, we got to get out of this room. We got to get rid of these mobsters. I don't know how, but we got to get rid of these mobsters. And one of the mobsters says, hey, I'm going to run for office. I'm going to do less stealing than this guy over here. And I think that might be a better path towards getting rid of the mobsters. And you disagree with me. And so I'm saying, well, I'm going to, even though this is a horrible situation, you can't apply morality. You can't apply that moral standard to me because I am under duress. I am responding to the initiation of the use of force against me. So I'm very lenient about, so long as people recognize that the state is initiating force against them and their goal is to get rid of that initiation of force, I'm extremely lenient in terms of what personal choices they think are the best tactics to make that happen. Because I don't think it's immoral to shoot back, even if you hit a bystander. You are doing this out of defense.
That's an interesting argument, and I have heard it before, and I don't disagree with you necessarily. I feel like if, in a society where you have a choice to vote, you should probably choose not to vote. This is kind of the direction I tend to go. There's no right answer here, obviously, but you do make an excellent point for it. I can't argue against it, honestly. At least not yet. I haven't put that much thought into it, and I'm not necessarily going to try to either because it's a good solid point as far as I can tell. But it's just, I feel like in a situation where you have a choice of whether to vote or not, you just don't vote, and you express your discontent in other ways. I mean, I can still do important political works without directly participating in the system itself. I can have a podcast or something called Unframe of Mind where we have conversations about these things. And
yes,
I'm just brainstorming, of course.
Yeah, theoretically.
Off the top of my head, what I'm saying is there's other ways that I can affect politics and I can affect what happens with the state and the government without directly participating in the system itself. And I try to minimize my exposure and my participation within that system as much as possible. You can read into that however you choose.
No, and I agree with that. And I my whole point is I think it's really a personal tactical decision, not a moral one right. At that point. And, I don't normally vote at all. And when I did vote, you might appreciate this. When I did vote, my goal was gridlock. So I would vote for whatever party needed more to stop the other part, because I figured the government doing nothing is better than whatever the hell either one of them is going to do. So the more gridlock I can have, it's like staving off my execution a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense.
It's just you're just prolonging the the though in that case.
Yes, that's all I'm doing. I totally admit that's all I'm doing. I'm just prolonging the inevitable. But it buys me time.
Man. Why don't you grow some balls, man, and take the arrow for your kid before you end up prolonging it so long that they're the ones that end up having to take the arrow?
Oh, well, I'm not. One doesn't preclude the other, right? So I can prolong it, and for example, start a place called Unsafe Space where we have conversations talking about anarchy and peaceful parenting and the Enlightenment. So I can do both of those things. And I actually haven't voted normally, but yeah. I do sometimes when I think it will help prolong things and give me more runway to fight.
And to be clear, I do say grow some balls with the utmost of respect.
Of course. Well,
guys,
I can't even grow a beard. What are you talking about, man?
I'm loving watching this. Can I just sit back and...
I'm sorry, Keri. I feel like this is anarchy show.
I'm not saying that because it's been really fun watching the two of you talk.
Here's what I've enjoyed about this, because she is like the audience that we actually get to see the authentic reactions. Like as we bring up these points, she's like,
"Yes."
You almost see the gears ticking. Like, huh?
Yeah.
So then what happens is other people watching this will also see Keri and go, huh? Yeah, when you see somebody nod and you kind of want to nod with them, like that. Carter, you doing?
Yes. Carter's never made the horse argument before, which I have to say, Carter.
Yeah,
and he said for a while that he's trying to give me the anarchist pill or whatever, and it was kind of a joke that he is. But you never did that argument. I think the horse pill would have.
The horse again, I try to take it and bring it back down to as simplistic, concrete examples as I can, as if I'm teaching it to a 5-year-old. Not to say that you have the mentality of a 5-year-old by no means, but it's just I try to keep it nice and simple and make sure the analogy actually makes sense as best as I can.
That's the best way to do it in conversation.
Analogies get so deep and so complex and convoluted that you're like, yeah, sure. Okay, whatever. And they've done checked out, moments ago, and they're not paying attention anymore. But you keep it nice and simple. Like, okay, so we got this thing here. In this system it works this way, and in this system it would work this way. Which one do you kind of prefer? Oh, well, I kind of prefer that one there because that seems a lot nicer and a lot more voluntary, and this feels like nobody's holding a gun at my head if I refuse. There's no gun in the room on that one. That's interesting. I like that better.
Yeah. And the truth is, actually, all this stuff needs to be, this needs to all be very simple. You don't, in order to get people to even agree with or understand things. I mean, not everyone wants to have a deep philosophical conversation. You need to be able to explain the non-aggression principle, which Keri, I think supports, right? The non-aggression principle is pretty straightforward. Like you can teach a 5-year-old the non-aggression principle basically. And it's like, it's not some convoluted way of having to think. It's pretty intuitive and straightforward.
Well, I think a lot of times when people, like a lot of bad ideology that we talk about on the show, is one of the ways it's obvious is when people are using unnecessarily complicated ways of talking about it, or sort of obscuring the fact that they're not really saying anything by using a lot of academic sounding words, pseudo intellectual jargon. And I definitely feel that even the most nuanced conversations, if you're trying to get a point across, you can figure out how to make that point in a way that the average person can understand you, if your goal is to be understood. But I don't think that, bad ideology, the goal is not to be understood. The goal is to manipulate.
I like what you said, if your goal is to be understood. And that's interesting because you see a lot of this happening on the left, especially where they take words and complicate the meaning of them, or they change the meaning of them and they start to use them in a different way. So where people can't quite keep up with, or they tell you like these simple phrases that you've been using for hundreds of years, those are racist. So you have to use this much more complex term that most people aren't going to try to learn. Otherwise you are somehow offensive, bigoted, racist, or whatever it is. And a lot of these things, a lot of these terminology changes I keep seeing are only have the effect of kind of shutting down speech insofar as it makes it so complicated that people just kind of throw their hands up and give up because it's just easier to just say, okay, I don't know what, okay, sure, whatever. I'll just shut up. I won't say anything because I don't want to get accused of saying the wrong thing, you know?
Yeah. It is. It's about, it's what Carter's talked about before. It's when you use words or language as a tool to control rather than as a tool to create better understanding. So they are using words as tools, but they're not using them in the same way that I would say we try to use words to make sure that people understand what we're saying, even if they disagree, that at least they understand they're not getting the wrong impression or they're not leaving a conversation having a misunderstanding about what we meant. They use words the opposite way, and it's just to try and force compliance with the belief system.
I think it's
this is happening
now.
Intimidation,
right? I think it's intellectual intimidation, right? You don't understand the words I'm using, but I have a fancy degree from Harvard, and so you need to get on board with the new definition of racism, Keri. Otherwise, you're a horrible person, right? It's intimidation, and regular people are like, okay, like I don't want to be a racist. Right? So
there used to be a time when you it's a pretty common phenomenon where you would kind of give excuses for your racist grandpa. He comes from a different time. He's a great guy. He just still has these ideas that are, we don't do those ideas anymore. But nowadays everything's so escalated that you have to have the ideas, you have to have them right now. This new terminology, if you're not using it, 3 days ago, you're already behind the curve, and now you're just falling, and now it's like you can't possibly keep up with it. Like I have a hard time keeping up with it, and I like keeping up with it. Okay. Right. It's like, and even with the job change, like one of the disadvantages that I found is I don't have the time to listen to as many podcasts. I used to listen to about 12 hours worth of podcasts in an 8-hour shift every night. So you could really, that's all I did. I just had my headphones in, did my thing, and went on about my business. So I'm starting to feel like what it must feel like to be a normal working American, or normal working anybody for that matter. I don't know why I differentiated American. And you have kids. I've got 4 kids. I've got a full-time job. I'm working now. And like to listen to these podcasts or try to read articles and keep up with the latest stuff. I'm not overwhelmed, but it's like I really feel the pressure of trying to keep up now. Whereas, imagine being somebody that doesn't really want to know about this stuff. Maybe they're interested in other things, and then you're kind of hearing it through the peripheral, or it's kind of mentioned in passing, and you just don't know, and then you get ambushed all of a sudden by somebody who's woke as hell, and like, I don't know any of this. I guess I'm racist. I don't
well
know.
The dirty secret is it's not intended for you to be able to keep up with it. It's intended to the way to train compliance is to get you to constantly feel like you have to just obey because you don't know and you're behind the 8 ball, and eventually you just stop even questioning whether you're behind the 8 ball, and because eventually you just learn to comply. So I don't think it's intended for you to ever understand or keep up with.
And what you're talking about with people, trying to keep up and having a lot to do and not having time to maybe listen to a lot of shows or do a lot of reading. And there's so many people that I know or I've talked to in the past 2 months, whether online or by phone or in person, people who are just like busy people living normal lives, trying to raise kids, trying to put food on the table, who have not been paying a lot of attention to this stuff, who are now starting to see it, because now it's infiltrated the mainstream to such a degree that you can't not see it, or it's coming into their workplace, or it's coming into their city council, or it's coming into their kids' school, or it's being preached to them by the corporations that they turn on Netflix and here's your recommended Black Lives Matter playlist for today, or it's on Spotify, it's everywhere. And so for those people, I think those of us who are talking about what this belief system is, I think that everybody has like a different role to play and different talents and different ways of attacking it. And I think all of us have to get a little better at being more, I need to get better anyway, at being more efficient and doing things in smaller chunks and just really kind of, like you said, explaining it to a 5-year-old. What is this belief system? Can you explain it to a 5-year-old what it really is? You know?
So you said something that kind of gave me an idea, and maybe I'm completely way off, but I almost wonder if that's part of the reason why, when the parenting issue in particular comes up, is because these people that have been living these busy lives, raising kids and doing everything else, and being told by the media how terrible a person they are, now somebody's coming in and questioning the one thing they felt like maybe they were doing right.
Oh yeah.
You know, that's a major your life when you have kids. That is your life, and now you're told that I'm doing that wrong too. I guess I can kind of understand why you would be so defensive when that's up.
I think there's also just like deeper psychological thing, right? Because your parent, like a lot of people parented the way they were parented. So attacking you for your parenting, or even suggesting that your parenting might want to change, like you should rethink it. A lot of the I don't know if you've seen this, but a lot of responses I see are like, it worked fine for me. It's like this, they have loyalty to their parents and the way that they were brought up. And so anything that questions what they're doing is an affront to their entire family structure and the love for their parents and how awesome their dad is. And like, how dare you suggest that he was abusing me when he spanked me? We're like, I think there's a ingrained psychological barrier to being able to hear that because we learn our parenting from our parents.
Yeah, and it becomes normalized to a point where you don't feel like anything was wrong. And then when you actually do question it, it's interesting how many conversations that I've heard and have had where they're like, oh, my childhood was fine. Everything was great. I had a great childhood. And when you start getting down into the weeds, you're like, oh, they start realizing, man, I thought it was normal. Wow, that was a really abusive relationship I was in with my parents. Like, you start to really realize what you actually experienced was not okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, I've even had conversations with people who were raped by the boyfriend of their mom, and mom's totally blameless. Like, there's no I have a great relationship with my mom. My mom's awesome. I'm like, your mom put you in a house with the rapist. Like, there's culpability there, kid. But it's so people are so afraid to ascribe any negative moral to let any negative moral points accrue to their parents. I don't know. I think it's just, I think it's this kind of parental bond thing that it just threatens the bond, because they don't want to have to go say to mom, hey mom, that boyfriend, I don't know if you know, but you kept leaving me alone with him and this is what happened. Like, that was bad of you, mom. Like,
it gets even worse than that. I've had conversations with people, for example, I'm not trying to give out specific names or details or anything like that, but this person I know, she grew up, her parents divorced when she was about 11, 12 or something like that. And her mom ended up getting with some other guy who then decided he thought it was a good idea to sit in her room at night and masturbate while he thought she was sleeping. Okay.
Jeez.
Gross. So then she goes and tells her mother about what's going on, and her mother makes excuses for him, does nothing about it, stays with the guy. But somehow later on down the road, she still thinks her mom is all the world.
Right.
Fast forward many, many years later, it starts to kind of dawn on her mother's role in this. And she finally had to cut her mom out, at least to some extent, and is actually on a path to healing finally, once the blame and the responsibility was laid at the shoulders and laid at the feet of the person that actually was a part of it and actually was responsible for protecting her and didn't. Only then was she able to start healing. Right. And that kind of goes back to the very beginning, what we were talking about, how people kind of use this politics and weather and all that crap like that, sports even, to kind of avoid bringing up these difficult subjects, because it's just much better just leave well enough alone.
Right. It's much easier to say, how about them Steelers, than like, hey, your boyfriend raped me. Why didn't you protect me?
Yeah, I feel like that would be a great time for a totally inappropriate punchline, but I'm just gonna forgo at this point.
Yeah, it would be. Go ahead, make your inappropriate person. No.
Oh, I didn't have one. I was trying to pretend like I did, but I felt like it needed one.
Yeah, I feel like there was one there. I just don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to take the high road here, and you won't let me. All right.
No. Well, you have a reputation. I'm trying to help you live down to it. So
That's right. Yeah.
So can we back up for a minute and just talk about I guess it's not backing up, but I think I mentioned earlier you've had some wild guests on your show.
hmm
I'm saying wild in the like guests that would make many people go, and you treat them with respect and you have conversations with them. What are some of the kind of most outrageous things that that would get you canceled? Like, what are some of the most outrageous conversations that you've had on Unframe of Mind?
Oddly enough, I would say probably just because of my positions and because Anthony is a Christian conservative, probably every conversation we've ever had. But I know that's
you
not
guys
what you're
argue
asking. No, not that we argue, but we have conversations and we talk about shit. We talk about, race issues, and we talk about all sorts of social justice issues, and whatever is on our mind, we'll talk about it. And we're very open about it and blunt about it. And so there's a very big possibility that any of our shows could have gotten us canceled, and probably still will. Who knows? But as you alluded to, we did actually speak with a avowed racist, like straight up white. I think he said he's not a white nationalist, but he is a racist. He kind of made some weird differentiation between the two, and I'm not really sure. Now, ironically, after the show, this guy pitched a bitch because his audio was bad. Like, he didn't give a shit about the topic at hand. He just wanted me to shut down the show and remove it because his audio was bad. He didn't like it.
The sound quality?
Yeah. And I was like, that really kind of, it's interesting because I feel like I don't want to like make any kind of diagnosis.
People can't hear my racism clearly.
Right. And it was like, okay. And I'm trying like, I'm trying to like understand where he's coming from is the thing. Like, I don't agree with anything he says, but I'm trying to understand it. Right. Because I feel like I can make my point stronger, and I feel like if I can shine some light on that idea, like I'm actually going to live to my principles. Shining light on bad ideas, for example, is the best speech. So it would be weird for me not to have a racist on the show, if that makes sense. Like that would be completely like, oh, he's avoiding the racist because he's too scared. No, that's not how. Now, there was one guest that I chose not to have on the show, and only one. He was a convicted pedophile who was in jail for years, ended up getting released, wrote a book about his experiences, and wanted to come peddle his fucking book on my show. Yeah. And I struggled with that because I'm like, I want to give this guy a chance to tell his side of the story and talk and explain to us what goes through the mind of a pedophile. That would be interesting, I think, in and of itself. But at the same time, I'm not about to have him on to peddle a book. It's just not happening. If he was just coming to try to educate and try to help and heal and maybe even make amends or apologize or something, maybe I would have considered it, but I don't know. That was a tough one. But beyond that, I've not turned down anybody at all ever.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, I listened to the episode with the racist guy, and I actually think that there was really something that came out of that conversation that I don't think would come out of a conversation if you didn't have a conversation with the racist, is you asked him about his progression, because he was a leftist, and he like, maybe progression's not the right word, but you asked him about his transformation. And
that ideological journey of sorts. Yeah,
but one thing that really struck me was, it seemed like because the left is so hypersensitive about any race topic, any suggestion of anything that might slightly be outside of their narrative, it sounded like his journey was, I said some things which actually weren't racist, but I was curious about at the beginning. I was called a racist as a result. And that's what led him into like looking up these actual racists and like well on his path. Now he's a racist.
Yeah, that's very possible. I don't I don't know. Maybe he already had these preconceived notions at some point and just wanted to find that evidence that supported his views, which a lot of people do that as well. There's no telling. There's no telling, man.
And plus, as we've talked about, I think a lot of people who are on the SJW left probably maybe personally have racist views themselves. That's why they ascribe this whatever personal issues they have to entire races or sexes of people, And you see them do these confessionals, and Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, is a confessional of sorts where she admits to racist, like things that she's thought before or racist fears of hers. And then she mistakenly ascribes those to like all white people. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a bit of overlap between people who kind of bounce between those two, or who have moved between those two extremes. I think they overlap quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you've said in the past. Go ahead.
Oh, so another guest that I would probably recommend checking out is we had an interview a while back with somebody by the name of Lily Forrester. And she told her story about how they are anarchists of sorts that moved down to Mexico and ended up getting involved in some shit. And her boyfriend ended up getting killed. And there's a Facebook Live video that went viral for a while of her, freaking out about this going on. They're trying to just live a life, an anarchic lifestyle. And there's so much stuff to this story that you really got to check it out. It's pretty wild. Like, you hear the kind of journey she had and is having, and trying to regain her life and get back on her feet and that kind of thing. It's something else, man.
She's trying to live an anarchic lifestyle in Mexico?
I believe so. Anarchapulco and that kind of area.
Interesting.
There was, I'm trying to remember her name. Her boyfriend's, he went by the name of John Galton. If you've read Atlas Shrugged, you'll understand that reference. That was his name. Not his real name, but that was the name he went by. But he kind of fell in line with a lot of those principles and belief systems as well. It was a pretty powerful episode. And there we have a lot of those like that, where we talk about pretty important stuff. Like I said, parenting, spirituality, politics, whatever. Just we're all over the place, but we do try to keep it as entertaining as possible.
Yeah, I think you guys are a fun version of us.
A fun version.
Yes. Yes, with dirtier jokes.
Yeah, you have dirtier jokes, and you've got the atheist anarchist, and you've got the Christian, but you're more funny.
I'm not really.
You're more entertaining.
I'm not really conservative.
That's true.
Wait, are you a Christian?
Yeah, I'm a pretty new Christian. Yeah.
Why?
Well, because God spoke to me, and look, I had a long path back to God. I don't, Carter and I every once in a while we'll talk about this, but not a lot. Really
not often. I've never asked you why.
Okay, why?
Not like that.
No.
I felt like, look, there's a Bible verse that really speaks to me, and I've since read it in a few different places in the Bible, where God says, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will steer you back on the path. And it speaks to me because I felt like that's what he had to do with me, because I had gone so far afield and was so stubborn. And if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be a Christian and going to church and trying to study the Bible and talk to God and pray, I would have laughed in your face, because it would have seemed so foreign and impossible. But when I started leaving, these things happened side by side. I don't really know if there was a chicken or an egg, or they just happened at the same time. But when I was leaving my ideology, I was also searching for God. I was also going through like probably the lowest part of my life personally, and figuring out who I was and what I believed. And I became really obsessed with, I remember a while I became very obsessed with whether or not we have souls. Like, I wanted to answer this question. I started asking. I would be at the gym and I would, go to the shower, and before I got in the shower, I just remember this one moment. It just became, I was compelled. I was texting friends like, do you think we have souls? And they're like, it's 7 a.m. Why are you texting me? But I became gripped with these questions. And so
did you find a shower at the gym?
I didn't find a soul. I got some answers. So the time I got out of the shower, I had some answers from friends. But yeah, I started going to a spiritual center, which worked for me at the time. It was the only place I probably would have gone at that time, because it was so open and not non-denominational. And it was kind of a mixture of Christian beliefs along with some New Age stuff, and very much about like Eckhart Tolle kind of, being present, being conscious, like a mindfulness kind of stuff. And so I was going to this place called Agape Spiritual Center, and I feel like that's the door that God used to bring me back in, because I wouldn't have gone through any other door. And I enjoyed that for a while, and it served its purpose. And then I was going to another spiritual center when I moved to Texas, and that served its purpose. And then I just started exploring. I started going to different kinds of churches and trying to see if I could feel God there. And I had a Catholic friend who had recently come back to her Catholic faith, who had also, been a non-believer for several decades. And so she took me to Catholic services, which I really liked, but ultimately I didn't stay there long term. And anyway, where I'm at now is a place that really works for me. It makes so much sense to me why I had to go on this long, convoluted path to get where I'm at. And I have these moments where, I don't try to argue them with reason, because I can't. Like Carter says on our show, feelings are not arguments.
That's
and
Ben Shapiro.
I know.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, and also, but you say, there's no different ways of knowing or whatever.
I do say epistemologically, there's only reason, and there's not another way of knowing, and
which is why I don't try to convince anybody of what I believe. If they want to ask me about it and have questions about it, great. But I'm not going out and here's what I believe, and you should believe this too. That's just not. I know some Christians do that. It's just not what I feel like I'm called to do. It's sort of like how you talked about your kids, Daniel, illustrating your philosophy or your belief system if you've done it right. Well, I kind of feel like if I behave in a way that reflects my beliefs, then that's all I need to do, because then the people who God is speaking to will ask me. They'll come to me. I don't even have to, talk about my beliefs, and they'll want to know. So
that sounds like an amazing journey, and I congratulate you on that discovery. That's awesome. I really enjoy. There's a church or two that I have been to. Believe it or not, as an atheist, I have gone to church a time or two.
I believe it.
Mainly, it's because my wife is a Christian, and I went with her. And the only reason I enjoyed going to these particular churches is because the pastor was. The stories he was telling, if I just kind of ignored the supernatural stuff and the God stuff, the actual core messages that he was trying to convey were really good messages, very, very good in terms of humor. I liked his humor, and the fact that they knew exactly who I was and what I was about and didn't treat me no differently. That for me was like, okay, like I've been around judgmental Christians. I've been around ones that like almost back up from you and hold up a cross in front of them just because they're so terrified by what you might, influence them with. But this one here, they're just like, I'm just like a normal person, like anybody else. And they're going to talk to me the same way and treat me the same with the same respect. And I was like, that's the kind of Christians that I can get on board with,
Yeah.
The principles.
Well, you are the kind of atheist I get on board with.
All right, thank you. Yes, I'm not a scary guy. I hope not. It's like there's this phrase that I've heard thrown around in light of Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to those. This idea of being a Christian atheist, and I was like, that's interesting, because I kind of feel like in principle wise, I feel like I'm more of a Christian than most Christians are, if that makes sense. I don't know. I don't believe in God, but I do believe that I hold more of the principles and actually follow through with the principles more consistently than other Christians I've ran into,
It's funny that you say that, because I've talked about this before. One of the things that bothers me is Christians who claim to be Christian but then don't follow Christianity at all. But I spent a while as like I did call myself an evangelical atheist. It was really important to me to argue with Christians. And it was probably during the years that Keri was a social justice warrior arguing with people. I was arguing. I was an evangelical atheist arguing with Christians. And it was Jordan Peterson, actually, one of the main it wasn't specifically Jordan Peterson, because I had already kind of dropped the evangelical atheism, but Jordan Peterson also really, for me, brought value back to Christian tradition, like helped me see the value in some of the Christian tradition. And now I look at more as like, there were group evolutionary strategies that worked really well and were codified in story form, and we should pay attention to those because there's some lessons to be learned there, and we don't have to take them literally. So I think what you're saying kind of, it really resonates with me. Were you always that way, or did you go through a phase of like, screw Christianity, and then kind of come back?
Well, that phase probably lasted for about the singular year of my 13th year. About it. Beyond that, I think I was pretty hard on some Christians during that time when I was just trying to figure this out, and that was just the only kind of information I was getting was that kind of message. Like I agreed with it, but this is their methodology for getting that point across. Okay, I guess that's what we're doing now. It probably wasn't honestly until mid to late 20s before I started kind of waking up to the anarchism section of this, and finally it's like every section of my life I no longer had to compartmentalize. I didn't have to have my government bucket, my state bucket, and I didn't have to have my religion bucket and my parenting bucket and my job bucket. Yes. No, all of a sudden it's like I could have these principles that flow through all of that consistently and make sense to me, and I don't have to be different people for different situations. I don't have to go to church and pretend to be something that I'm definitely not, and then go to my friend's house and pretend to be somebody completely different. It's like all the principles just works. The non-aggression principle, you can apply that everywhere. You don't have to have it in a bucket.
It's very liberating. It's like the Mark Twain quote kind of. It reminds me of the Mark Twain quote. I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, you don't have to remember. If you don't lie, you don't have to remember anything. It's kind of like if you have some guiding principles that you understand the foundation of them and you're sure about them, you can kind of just apply them everywhere, and it's like a superpower in your life. You're like, oh yeah, I'm not like. I remember getting to a point where like I'm not worried about talking about anything that I haven't even studied or don't know about yet, because like. I'll just admit that I don't know if I don't know, and I have principles to guide me, and like, I'm done. It's easy.
Well, funny enough, Jordan Peterson woke me up to that idea as well.
Oh, interesting.
The idea of saying, I don't know enough about that to have an opinion, and the idea that speaking somebody else's opinions as your own when you haven't given a lot of thought to them and they're not really your own is a form of lying. Like he was the one that made me start thinking about that. The way that people will sometimes, even like in any tribe, it doesn't have to be a social justice echo chamber, but any tribe that you're in, if you just automatically have these opinions on things that you haven't taken a lot of time to think about and figure out what you think, then how that's not really truthful. That's something, like climate change. I don't know what I think. I probably won't know for a while because I don't have time to do all that reading. So.
Same here. I don't know.
Yeah. But I'll say this. I don't know the science, but I know the principle, which is the answer is not a larger state. Like I know what my answer is not going to be. It's not going to be violate people's property rights and steal shit from them. Like, okay. Like
right.
that's pretty clear to me.
Give the government more money.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, is there a problem? Yeah, maybe what the extent is, what the causes are, like, oh, that's all can be investigated. But the answer isn't more tyranny. And the
answer is freedom.
That's right. That's right.
The answer always, no matter what it is, the answer is always freedom.
Yeah. You mentioned Socrates in your list of influential people. I know we're keeping you a while. This will be, we can wrap up soon. But I love that you mentioned Socrates because I feel like Socrates is the answer to almost not all of our problems, but
it's quite a big shoe to fill there.
Right. Well, but hear me out. We run around saying things without clear understanding of the definitions of anything we're saying, and we have these conversations and fight over stuff and claim things with zero definitional understanding. And I feel like Socrates, if we just had a giant Socrates in the sky that was yelling at us to like define your terms, we would spend like 10 years arguing about definitions, but then after that, it would be like, oh, we can have conversations again, and things would kind of fall out. I don't know, but
found myself kind of applying the Socratic method to myself the other day. It was somebody made some point about how wolves in the wild, there is no such thing as an alpha male. They only take on those attributes in captivity. And I was like, my initial gut reaction was like, "Oh, you're such an idiot! I can't take anything you're serious if you're throwing that bullshit at me." And I'm like, before I ever say things like that, because I don't know, I just don't know that.
Right, you're not a biologist, yeah, who studied wolves,
big notion, right? That wolves come in alphas and betas and all that. We know this from like grade school, right? So I went and started looking at it real quick before I responded and just gave my gut reaction, which would have made me look like an idiot if I would have had to go back and look later. But I went back and looked and I was like, well, I got to refigure my entire formulation of that argument. I wasn't wrong. Okay. I didn't mean that. It didn't mean that I was wrong in my initial idea, but the example she threw at me was a good one that supported her argument, not mine, is what I'm saying. And I wouldn't have known that if I'd have just, thrown out my preconceived notions and wrote her off as an idiot,
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
And the other definitional problem I see is, based on who you've cited as influential philosophers, I'll assume that you're on board with this concept. Concepts there's a hierarchy of concepts, and you can't just use a concept and deny the predecessor concept of it hierarchically, like logically hierarchically. And people do that all the time. They'll say, I'm trying to think of an example, but they'll use the word freedom detached from what freedom means, like freedom from what and from whom, and how does that come? Where does freedom come from? Why is there such a thing as freedom? Why is that a value at all to anyone? And like, what does that mean? And so it's easy to get very confused about how to think about things in a principled manner when you have these floating abstractions in your head for like these concepts, and you don't really understand how they fit into a conceptual hierarchy, and you don't have clear definitions. A lot of times you end up arguing with people, and it turns out you're not even really speaking the same language if you get them into the definitions, if you start talking about definitions.
Perfect example. I recently invited some new person to our group, just based on that exact idea. That exact conversation was had where we were discussing. It was in a page called "Capitalism Kills," and I was, I started, being the dissenting voice, and a couple of people were like, "What? You do know what this page is called, right?" I was like, "Well, yeah, I do. I just want to know what you guys actually think, so I can, maybe understand where you're coming from." Like, I join all kinds of groups that I disagree with for the same reason. But this lady, we started talking, and it turns out that all it was is her and I agreed on everything, except we had a different definition of what capitalism actually meant. I use capitalism and free market interchangeably. She differentiates the two and uses capitalism interchangeably with corporatism.
I was going to say, with the corporatism.
Once we were figure
Those are totally different.
Right. But once we were able to figure, because from the Marxist style thinking and that kind of thing, that term capitalism has been made to mean corporatism. It from their lineage of thinking, that's where that comes from. So it has a negative connotation automatically because of that. And it took us a minute to kind of get around. And once we dug it down to the core principles, that hierarchy of concepts you were talking about, it was like we kind of understood the definitions that we were using were not very representative of what we were actually trying to argue for or against. And it really helped a lot to understand where we were both confusing the two terms. And after that, I was like, you know what? I love this conversation. We have a group where we have these kind of conversations. Come on out. And she hopped on in, and I've enjoyed having her along ever since, because she's another dissenting tone to go against the kind of overwhelming amount of right-wing type ideologues we have in the group. So
Right.
That's fantastic.
That's great. And it explains a lot. That's one of the ones that I've struggled with. It's like, I don't understand why people keep confusing. Like, capitalism is very simple. Why do they keep thinking it's all these other things? I didn't realize that there was like Marxist roots into definitionally what capitalism is that is different from what I'm defining as capitalism.
Right. So if you're arguing with those people about it, if you can break away, and a lot of them still disagree with free market anyway, but if you can break them away from that capitalism word and try to agree to talk about corporatism versus free market, I think that's a much better way of communicating the ideas. And I think there's a lot more common ground there, honestly. And that's another place where definitions have been co-opted to put people against each other unnecessarily, I think. I don't know. I'm still kind of new to that particular differentiation, but I think it holds a lot of truth. I hope it does anyway.
Yeah,
I think it does. Well, thank you, Daniel. We're going to wrap up. I want to plug your podcast again. It's called Unframe of Mind. People can find it here on YouTube, and they can also find you online at unframeofmind.com. Is that correct?
Correct.
Any final thoughts? We usually like to leave on a positive note.
Yeah, all social media at Unframe of Mind. You can find us on all social media. Yep.
You might have missed. You're obligated to give Keri something inspiring.
Give me something positive.
Positive. So, not to put you on the spotlight, but tell us why civilization is not on the brink of failure.
I am in the spotlight, and that's okay. Okay, that's good. I'm gonna have to really think. If I'd have known ahead of time, I'd have come up with something totally profound that you guys would use for a clip in your shows for all of eternity. But since I guess it's on the spot, and I'll have to come up with something. Listen, I feel like there is a lot more commonality between people than we realize. And this group I keep mentioning on Facebook, it's shown me that there is a lot of people that are kind of the silent majority that don't believe the bullshit. They don't believe the extremism we see on the news. And they are able to still have those conversations with one another like we used to do back in middle school, where we could still be friends in the morning. We could disagree, even vehemently disagree, and still be friends. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of people out there. They're out there. They're kind of quieted themselves and censored themselves, and they're afraid to speak their voice and speak their mind publicly. But within the group, when they're a little more open, and even during our Zoom calls and stuff we have the best conversations.
That's great.
Well, that's inspiring. Thank you. That's a good way to finish.
How was that for on the spot?
That was great.
I thought it was wonderful.
That was great.
I love what you're doing. And thank you so much for giving us your time and coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Please avoid any contact with these individuals. Twitter tells me there is a 98.2% chance that these are all Russian bots. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. It is not a cult. Now please forsake all previous beliefs and stop asking questions. Computer voice Curtis, never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.